The GOP primary for governor in Kansas should have been a ho-hum race. That is, until President Trump got involved and went against the GOP incumbent in favor of Kris Kabach. Yes, that state official who helped Trump with that Fugazi voter fraud panel. Well, the race is now a hotbed of controversy. It is too close to call. Then Kabach declared victory. Then his lead was cut, and an official is blaming the Secretary of State for getting it wrong in favor of Kabach. The Secretary of State is Kris Kabach, and his office would oversee what seems like a certain recount. So everyone is talking about what he will do. We are talking to Kris Kabach. He'll be live in a moment. Also, the death toll from Hurricane Maria and Puerto Rico just soared. It is now more than 20 times what the government told us it was in December. Why is the truth only coming out now, almost a year after the storm? And why isn't the president saying anything about it? Those are Americans down there. Also, a state of emergency declared in Charlottesville ahead of the first anniversary of that deadly Unite the Right rally. How are we doing 12 months later? D.L. Hughley joins us with a message he says you won't like, but you need to hear. It's my birthday. Not bad for 61. Let's get after it. All right, so we're talking about an election that pits a Trump loyalist against the sitting governor, the same party, and the margin is razor thin. 91 votes currently separate the two. So either way, you're looking at a recount under the law there, very likely. But there's one thing. One of the candidates will be in charge of that recount. That candidate is Kansas's current Secretary of State, Kris Kabach, as I told you in the open. His opponent is the sitting governor. He is asking Kabach to recuse himself. Will Secretary Kabach accede to the governor's wish? We have him right now. Welcome to Prime Time.
Great to be with you.
So the obvious question is, are you going to recuse yourself?
Yeah, I actually, I think I gave him the idea. I said that to the press a day or two ago, I said if there's really no point in doing it because the Secretary of State doesn't actually have any role in the counting of provisional ballots or in any recount. It's purely sort of a titular role. You're head of the state election process, but all of the work is done at the county level. The counties do the counting of ballots. So there's really no point to it, but I said if my opponent wishes me to, I'd be happy to. But it's purely symbolic. I don't think he understands the process.
So is that a yes?
Yeah, we'll be formally answering his request tomorrow, but I'll give you a heads up. Yes, I'll be happy to recuse myself, but as I say, it really doesn't make any difference.
All right.
My office doesn't count the votes. The counties do.
Let me ask you something. Is the process of oversight in a recount by your office different than it is in the main count?
Not necessarily. I mean, what our office does is it communicates the standards set by Kansas law to the counties. So we give them the official guidelines for the provisional ballot counting that's going to occur next week. We just send them the same thing we send them every 2 years, which is a list of all of the legal standards. These are the provisionals you should count. These are the provisionals you shouldn't count. So we give the standards, and then they do the counting, and we receive the results.
Okay.
That's the best way to summarize.
So it's the same as it was during the regular vote. That's what would happen during the recount.
Yeah, but of course the recount does have some, peculiarities defined by law, and those are
right, like setting a bond.
To go through
Whoever asks for the recount has to post bond.
Right,
the Secretary of State gets to set the bond.
That's right.
There's going to be an ethical question there about whether or not you're being fair with what bond is set. Why deal with that in an election, especially intra-party? You might as well just step away, right? All right, let me ask you something, though.
Yeah.
Here's why I ask you.
And that's what I'm going to do, yeah.
Let me ask you why I'm asking you about the recount.
And by the way, the bond isn't...
Go ahead. What about the bond?
Just quickly point. The bond would be... Yeah, the bond is set by the election officials lower down in the agency anyway.
Okay.
They just estimate the cost to the counties of the man hours that would take to do all of the labor.
Right.
So it's not something I get involved in anyway.
Right, but it's your, look, here's the game that we're playing here, is that it's not about whether there's a law that says you have to step away or whether or not you have direct control over it. It's the semblance of impropriety. It's what seems fishy, and that's really the standard that public officials should adhere to. We've made crimes like the new bar for public officials. It should be a little better than that. But the reason I ask you about whether or not your office's role is the same in the main count versus the recount is because Shelley Harms, the Thomas County clerk, she says that they counted 522 votes for your opponent, and that she showed us scanned the Kansas City Star of the form that showed 522 votes. And yet somehow, when it got to your office, it became communicated as 422 votes. That smells bad, does it not, Mr. Secretary of State?
Well, if you put it in context, it smells normal. Every year there are at least a dozen clerical errors that happen in the transcribing. So we do this the old school way, and most states do it the old school way, to avoid putting things, uploading to an internet site which could be hacked. So you are literally communicating vote tallies by phone, and people are typing them in. And there will be keystroke errors all the time. In fact, this is one of more than a dozen errors that we've already discovered. And that's why they're called unofficial results on election night. And every state has this. Kansas has it every year. There will be multiple
But you get why it raises a question of propriety.
Well, if you know the context, that it's not just this race, but there are all kinds of races that where someone, you're talking about thousands of numbers being communicated.
Oh, I get
and
it.
individual human beings taking those numbers. It's just human error. And someone, I don't even know who typed in the wrong number, but there will be other errors that we will catch. And that's why you count the numbers over and over and over again. You have multiple unofficial counts, and then you have a certification of official counts many weeks from now. So this happens all the time.
Right, but I'm just saying when you're the sitting Secretary of State and it happens in your favor versus your opponent, it smells bad. That's why you shouldn't be in the position for the recount. Just seems like a no-brainer to me. I don't know why you had to wait for Collier to ask you to recuse yourself. Just seems like a no-brainer.
Again, you should think through this, Chris, because the majority of states have elected secretaries of state, and they oversee the elections in which they are running. So by your logic, you should never have elected secretaries of state because they are overseeing their own elections. And I understand that.
Well, you'd have to add a fact.
And say, well,
you have to add a fact, though. The fact is, this race is razor thin in its margin, and it's going to go to a recount. It doesn't matter if you wind up winning by 8, 9 points.
Right.
Right? So you got to factor that into the context also. I don't think that it's an endemic problem where all secretaries of state must somehow, be sanctioned for when they run a race. This is special.
No. My point is your suggestion of your argument is that whenever a Secretary of State, that there's something inherently wrong with a Secretary of State overseeing
just in this case.
An election in which he himself is on the ballot.
Just in this case, because of how close it is, and you're going to be over the recount. That's why.
Like I said, it's purely symbolic because I don't have any involvement in the recount anyway, but I said, of course, if he wants me to, I would.
All right.
And he said, okay, I do want you to, so I will.
Now, we go to the bigger issue of what made this race interesting in the beginning, which was the president weighing in and saying, I think it should be Secretary of State Kabach, not the sitting governor in party. I want him. And they say, by all accounts, it helped you, that it boosted your fate within the primary, have you now really on the precipice of victory. Do you believe the president was paying you back for loyalty?
No, I don't think so. I think the president was looking at the race and he was saying, look, we've got an establishment, more traditional insider who's in the office right now, and we have Kris Kabach, someone I've worked with. I know him well. I've advised him on immigration issues both during the campaign and during the presidency, so he knows my advice, he knows my policies, and I think they line up more closely with his. So I think that's what drove him.
What does it mean to you that the Democrats do see it as a loyalty play and they believe that you're someone they could beat in a race that ordinarily they would run away from? They thought that, your opponent would beat them in state. He has a registration advantage. He has the incumbency effect. But now because of you and everything that happened with that voter fraud commission that went nowhere, they believe you're vulnerable.
Well, they can think that. I don't think that's correct. I mean, if you look at, there are many people who've tried to armchair quarterback this one and say which candidate, Collier or Kabach, would be better for the Democrats, who would be easier for the Democrats to beat. My personal view is that my opponent would be easier to beat because he is the successor to Sam Brownback, whose popularity numbers are very, very low. And the Democrats for the past 2 election cycles have run the same playbook every year, which is the Republican is Sam Brownback 2.0. This congressman is just like Sam Brownback. This state rep. They try to link everybody to him. With Governor Collier, that's obviously easier to do because he was Brownback's lieutenant governor.
But you have this big issue.
I don't think that
you have a big issue on your side, which is what happened with that voter fraud thing, which really seemed to have been a complete witch hunt from the outside. Not only did your commission never deliver anything substantive in terms of finding voter fraud, but it seemed to be a fool's errand that the president wanted out there to forward his notion of millions of illegal votes. That was never true.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree with you more. The commission was shut down because of more than a dozen lawsuits filed by groups from the left that didn't want the commission to do its work, and it became so hobbled by lawsuits that it had to shut down. But in the time that the commission was in existence, the commission pointed out more than 1,000 cases of convictions for voter fraud, almost all of them since the year 2000. These are convictions, which are the tip of the iceberg. Most are not don't result in convictions. And then on top of that, looking at 21 states, saw 8,400 cases of double voting just among the 21 states.
But those numbers,
if you extrapolate to all 50, if you extrapolate that to all 50 states, it increases exponentially,
but
not linearly.
You can't do that. And one of the key words
you can do the same analysis.
No, it's because it's not math.
If you did
every
the same
state's
analysis.
Different. But every state's different. And you say
no, right.
presented.
You say
let's
not
extrapolate.
extrapolate.
Hold on, I just want to make one point.
If you did the same analysis.
I just want to make one point, just for clarity for the audience. You were presented with evidence. You didn't find evidence. You didn't do investigating. And we looked into your numbers, obviously, in preparing for the interview when it came in. And the 1,000 convictions, first of all, you want to talk about context. You had 1 billion votes, right, since 2000. So you're talking about 1,000 convictions. And when you look inside that number, I believe you got it from the Heritage Foundation. And that report includes misconduct by election officials and other insiders. That's not about voters who are not legal or double voting. That's about this whole thing of every type of basket of conviction you could get within the voting system. That's not what you were supposed to be looking for.
The total of the 1,000 or so convictions, yes, it includes some misconduct, but that is a tiny, tiny slice of it.
But it's just from the Heritage Foundation. You didn't find it. The panel didn't investigate and find. You were given this by the Heritage Foundation.
But these are facts. Yeah.
Right, but you were given it by somebody. You didn't find it. So it's as fact as far as the Heritage Foundation is included. And the 8,400 instances come from the Government Accountability Institute.
Let's talk about that.
I'm just saying, it's...
Right, now let's talk about that.
Go ahead.
Okay, now what the commission would have done if we had continued and not been hobbled by the lawsuits is then you would take the same type of analysis that the Government Accountability Institute did, and you would apply that to all 50 states. You do the same analysis for 50 states that they had done for 21, and then you get a picture of the total number of double voting, which, by the way, is a huge crime. 8,400 cases in those alone. My office has the authority to prosecute voter fraud. We've prosecuted about 13 cases of voter fraud in the last 2.5 years or so, 3 years now. And in that time, we have 11 cases of double voting and 2 cases of aliens registering and or voting.
Chris, the president put you up to this commission to prove his theory that millions of people voted illegally in his election.
No.
And there's never been any proof of that, and you know it. You might be governor of a state soon. Shouldn't you own something like that so it doesn't just stay as a cloud over your head forever?
Okay, first of all, the commission was never charged with investigating how many votes were cast illegitimately in the presidential election. It was looking more broadly at the issue of voter fraud. And secondly, the total number of votes cast illegally in the 2016 election is certainly a very large number. One of the things the commission might have looked at had we continued. Can I continue?
Please.
One of the things that we might have looked at is the number of non-citizens who vote in the elections. That is a very substantial number. Now, in states like Kansas, the number may be in the hundreds or thousands voting in any given election. But in a state like California, the number is going to be much, much larger. In a state like Texas, much, much larger.
That's a guess.
And so those are some of the things. Well, the commission would have actually done the research and used government resources to actually look at and get some actual data on the table. I mean, it surprises me that people on the left are always simply saying, nothing to see here, nothing to see here, don't look at voter fraud.
You keep bashing it as the left was coming after you. And meanwhile, an email comes out that one of the people on your staff was looking for someone to help out who was conservative and Christian. It says right in the email. So don't make it like it was some fool's errand on the political side, like the left was coming after you. Your own commission was looking for someone pretty confident that he's conservative and Christian, too. Because that's what you want in a bean counter, right?
That wasn't
a conservative and a Christian.
That wasn't commissions. That email wasn't staff of the commission.
Who was she?
But the point is, we were talking about the larger context.
Who was
the
she?
larger context is people on the left. I can't even remember the person's name who said that.
I do.
The larger context is that the people on the left, or people who don't think voter fraud's a problem. Let's just use those terms, Chris. Okay?
People who don't
They say
think 2
nothing to
million
see
people
here.
voted in California and there was no need for tax dollars to go out there and try to prove that we have a problem with voter fraud, and we don't. That was the supposition. But listen, Secretary of State, I don't want to.
1,000 is not a lot
go
of
down
cases.
a rabbit hole.
1,000 is not a lot.
I don't
you
know what
already
the real
went down.
number
That's
is.
why
I
I'm
could pull
following
out
you
a
down.
number. 15,000.
Is 1,000 a large number?
18,000. If
Is
I don't have
1,000
any proof,
cases a
what
large
difference
number?
does the number make? You don't have any proof of it. You got presented with studies by other
Those are
people.
convictions.
But you
Convictions.
but
No,
you
no,
didn't
I'm talking
even
about
develop
convictions.
it. That's
now.
what I'm
1,000
saying.
convictions.
But listen, Secretary of State.
I'm asking you, is 1,000 a big number? Is 1,000 a big number?
Obviously, it's going to be about the context. I'd want to know the cases, and I'll tell you what, if I had my own commission, I wouldn't take the Heritage Foundation as my proof of investigating. I'd do it myself. That's what the
These
charge
are
was.
documented cases, documented in the court
Right, and they
record.
also
There's no
include all types of
opinion about whether they exist or
election
not.
workers, not the kind of stuff that you said you were going to find. But listen, Secretary